Hi everybody and welcome back to Exotics of the World TV, and in this video we are going to be talking about one of the most crucial parts of your enclosure, and that is your substrates. So we're going to talk about my personal top 5 favorite substrates for arid species. Picking the right substrate is super important for your animal's overall health and behavior. So without further ado, let's jump into the video. And kicking us off at number 5 is the Exoterra Stone Desert Bedom. This substrate comes in two different colors, Bahrainian black and Sonoran ochre. The Bahrainian black color is kind of more like grayish, and the Sonoran ochre is like a really nice, like standard, like browny, reddy kind of sand color. So let's talk about the pros and cons of this substrate. So first off, the pros are it's a natural substrate. So this means no chemicals or any nasties have been added to this substrate. So it's perfectly natural. This substrate is perfect for creating natural desert / like savanna bioscapes in your enclosure, just like how we have done with our leopard gecko enclosure. Another pro for this substrate is its ability to hold and maintain burrows. So this substrate has got quite a lot of clay in it, so when it gets wet it can get quite hard. So your animal, wherever you decide to pop in there, it's going to be able to dig, and once it does dig, it's going to create these like little tunnels and caverns in the substrate, really making it feel at home and being able to exhibit its natural behavior. Also, something else which I find with this substrate, because it's something that I personally use, I do find that it's not as dusty as other substrates. So that, for me personally, that is definitely another pro. So let's now talk about the cons of this substrate. So on the downside, when this substrate does in fact harden, it can be a little bit difficult to try and spot clean. So unlike other substrates that are loose, you can obviously just get like a sieve in there and sieve out any like nasties, like any shedded skin, any dead insects, any salad or anything like that that's come out, feces, that type of thing. With this substrate, it's very difficult to do that, and you end up taking more of the substrate out. Also, this substrate does only come in one size, and that size is 10 kilograms. Personally, to me, I would like the substrate to come in like maybe smaller bags, and as well maybe a size above that as well. Another con for this substrate is that it does only come in one size, and that size is 10 kilograms. Ideally, I would personally prefer it to come maybe like a 20 or a 25 kilogram, just so you've got the option of a larger size. So this next con is kind of related to the previous one that I've just mentioned, but it's to do with the price. So I think personally the RRP is a little bit too high for this substrate. It is a really good substrate and I would definitely recommend people using it, but I think near enough £20 for a bag of sand for 10 kilograms is version on taking the mickey a little bit. So the actual RRP for this product is around about $19.49. So you might get it a little bit cheaper, but on average it's around about $19.49. And coming in at number 4 is the Lucky Reptile Desert Bedom. Now this substrate comes in two different kinds. So you can get it in Nature Brown, which is like the standard kind of like sand looking one, or you can get it in Outback Red, which of course it more represents the Australian outback with that reddish kind of color. This substrate also does come in two different sizes. So the first size is 7 liters and then the other size is 20. So let's dive straight into the pros. So a really good pro for this substrate is its ability to mix really well with other substrates. For example, cocoa fiber. It really mixes in with cocoa fiber really well. So if you do need to bulk out this substrate and you're looking for a cheaper option, cocoa fiber is something that we would recommend doing. Another pro is that the two sizes that are offered are pretty good, especially if you're filling out a smaller enclosure or a larger enclosure. I personally find that the 20-litre sacks fit a 422 quite nicely. You don't get a super thick layer of substrate, but it's just deep enough. Again, as I've previously said, if you mix in other substrates such as like cocoa fibers or even potentially topsoil, you're going to get a nice thicker substrate, and again it mixes it really well. It also has a higher than average clay content in this substrate, making it really good for your burrowing and digging species of reptile. So what are the cons? Unless this substrate is either sprayed down regularly or it is mixed with like other substrates, it can become quite dusty quite quickly. So this could be something that could affect the respiratory system of your animal, or in fact you. So we would definitely recommend that you spray down your enclosure quite regularly. Now, this next con doesn't really apply to the nature brown, more so the outback red, but over a long period of time, the red does tend to stain the animal. But again, this typically only happens if you're just using the substrate on its own. If you're mixing it with other substrates, I personally have found that the staining doesn't really happen on the animal, or it doesn't really happen to the extent that it does if you're using it on its own. Moving on to number 3, we have the old school tried and tested method of the sand soil mixture. This substrate is really good if you're on a budget or if you really need a shit ton of substrate. This substrate can easily be achieved by adding child's play sand to topsoil. Now, let's go into the pros. Obviously, first off is the cost. It is very cost effective. It's also pretty good for animals that do like to dig and burrow, because as it's fairly cheap, you can pop loads and loads of substrate in there. So the animal's got a lot to go in there and dig into. And as well, in some instances, if you get the ratios right, it really does look like a really cool natural scape inside your enclosure. However, this brings me on to one of our first cons. If you do not get the mixture right, you can end up with it being too much of one or the other. And if it's too kind of sandy, it can get quite dusty quite quickly. And if it's like too soily, it can retain moisture a lot. So you're going to get condensation potentially inside the enclosure, which for a lot of arid species isn't really the best thing. So this next one is going to be quite dependent on what sand and soil mixtures you're going to be using, but if you're using quite low grade child sand, it can become dusty quite quickly, and exactly the same with your soil. We would always recommend just using topsoil and just go for peat freeze. Don't add any peat or anything like that in there. Really bad for the environment. So if you do find that it's getting dusty quite quickly, what you can do is, just like with the other substrates, just give them a gentle spray down. Now, you're not going to want to proper hose it down like you would do potentially with a more humid species, but just a light spray in the morning will be absolutely fine. This is more of a personal feeling, but to me, I don't really like the overall aesthetic look of the sand soil mixture. I think compared to the other pre-mixed substrates, it doesn't really add a lot of definition. It's all kind of samey. If you get the mixtures wrong, it can really bugger the substrate dynamics up within the enclosure. But yeah, it's just a personal thing for me. And coming in at number 2 is Beardy Life by ProRep. So Beardy Life is a pre-mixed sand soil mixture. So it's really good at mimicking the type of coloration that you would naturally find in the Australian outback, especially where bearded dragons and other Australian species are endemic to. This substrate is really easy to spot clean. So if your animal has gone to the toilet and it's done quite a big one, it's quite easy to clean it up, as it doesn't really super clump together like other substrates on our list. It's also not as dusty as other substrates as well, which is a positive. We would still typically recommend to just spray the enclosure down just in case, but compared to the other ones, the Lucky Reptile substrates, they're not as dusty as those. The consistency of the substrate as well is something personally to me, I really like it. I like the fact that it can have sometimes fairly big lumps of clay and rocks and stuff in there. As the substrate is a pre-mix, it also saves quite a lot of time and effort. All you literally need to do is just go to the store, buy it, open the bag and whack it in. So moving on to the cons. With the Beardy Life substrate, we do tend to find that if you have it in your enclosure over a long period of time and you haven't kept up with spot cleaning and it has got a little bit dusty and stuff, we do tend to find that it can sometimes stain the animal's feet and belly. Another con would be the price. So I use Beardy Life substrate quite a lot, but it is quite expensive, especially if you have got a fairly large enclosure. So personally to me, I don't think one bag really does a 4B2B2. So we would always typically recommend customers bulking it out with other kinds of substrate. What I personally think that the ProRep Beardy Life could do is have some bigger sizes and potentially just some smaller bags as well. Maybe do 3 different sizes, like a small, medium and a large. So the flip side to one of my pros would be the fact that sometimes this substrate can contain fairly large rocks. Now, personally, to me, I like the kind of like big, like rocky look. Other people, when I was trying to get some information on what substrates they like, told me that the big rocks were a bit of a problem for them. So that's why I've got it as a con as well. So having big lumps of clay and rocks in there is a pro and indeed a con. And finally, number 1, my all-time favorite arid substrate to use for reptiles is in fact the ProRep Desert Life substrate. So with the BioLife Desert substrate, it makes it really easy to turn your enclosure into a bioactive environment. So a bioactive substrate might sound a little bit advanced, but with this substrate, it does make it a lot easier. And as well, personally to me, I prefer like the look of live plants and the bioactive look in general in my enclosures. So let's move on to the pros. I think one of the big pros with the BioLife Desert substrate is, unlike the Beardy Life and like the other life series like the Leo Life, it doesn't come with those really big rocks. So it's more of like a super like 50-50 sandy soily mixture. Another pro for this substrate is that it mixes in really well with other substrates. So I like to use quite a wide variety of different kind of like soil mixes with my arid stuff. So moving on to cons then. I think personally one of the biggest cons for me with this substrate is the price. I think it is a little bit expensive for what you get, hence why we always would recommend like bulking it out with like other stuff, especially because it only comes in the one size, which arguably is kind of like another con. I personally would like, again, like either a size bigger or a size a little bit smaller. So I personally feel that the 10 kg bags do a like 3 foot by 18 by 18 tank pretty well, but anything bigger than that, then you're definitely going to need to either one, buy more of the same product, or potentially get some other products to kind of bulk it out. So with the ProRep Desert Life being number 1, it was a really hard toss-up between this substrate and the one that I'm just about to mention. So the one I'm about to mention, I'm going to put in there with an honorable mention. I always use these two substrates together, especially if I'm doing kind of like an arid bioactive setup. And that is in fact the Arcadia Arid Earth Mix. So I like to use both of these substrates together. So whereas the ProRep BioLife is a little bit more sandy, the Arid Earth Mix basically is just soil. The Arid Earth Mix as well is supercharged with lots of different vitamins and minerals, perfect for your plant growth. Also, with these two substrates coupled together, in terms of dust, it doesn't tend to get that dusty, which personally to me is an absolute boon. All right, and that's it. So they are our top 5, arguably 6, best substrates that I personally like using for my reptiles. Remember, the right choice is going to depend on quite a few different things. So your lifestyle, your budget, the animal itself, and what is going to be best for your pet. Whether you want something easy that you can just open the bag, pop it in, away you go and done, or you wanting something a little bit more technical like a bioactive substrate, each of these substrates do have their own unique benefits. Let us know in the comment section if you have any favorite substrates that you personally like using, or any ones that I've not mentioned in this video. And if you found this video helpful, please don't forget to like, share and subscribe. Make sure as well you click the little bell thingy so you get notified when we upload new videos. And on that bombshell, I'll see you in the next one. Ta-ra!